5 recruits thought they were teaching a lesson that afternoon in the mess hall. To them, she didn't belong, not with her accent, her skin tone, or her quiet confidence. They whispered, mocked, and waited for the right moment to humiliate her in front of everyone. But what they didn't know was that the woman they cornered wasn't just another officer. They were about to face a storm disguised as calm. 30 seconds later, every person in that hall would understand what happens when racism picks the wrong soldier. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the Navy's youngest tactical instructors, and one of the very few women of color to ever earn that position. She had survived grueling training, mental tests, and sleepless nights, but nothing had prepared her for what she would face from her own team. When Sarah first arrived at the base, she expected discipline, respect, and unity. Instead, she met silence, the kind that stings louder than words. Conversations stopped when she entered the room. Recruits exchanged glances, smirking behind their trays. Some called her diversity promotion under their breath. Others questioned how someone like her made it through the SEAL program. Still, Sarah kept her head high. She carried herself with quiet professionalism, believing her actions would silence their doubts. Every morning she arrived early, trained harder, and treated everyone with fairness, even those who resented her. She believed that strength wasn't proven in words but in restraint, but the more she succeeded, the more resentment grew. To some, her excellence was proof she didn't belong, a challenge to their unspoken hierarchy. They couldn't accept that a woman of color outranked them in skill, discipline, and command presence. The tension built slowly, like a storm gathering over calm water. Whispers became mockery. Mockery turned into sabotage. Misplaced gear, accidental spills, silent humiliation during drills. Yet Sarah never retaliated. She stayed silent, composed, and focused, until one afternoon, when the taunts turned into something no soldier should face from their own. A confrontation meant to break her. And in the mess hall that day, surrounded by 5 recruits who thought her silence meant weakness, Sarah Kim would remind everyone that courage has no color, and respect isn't given. It's earned. The morning began like any other. The metallic echo of boots striking the concrete, the smell of coffee mixing with sea salt, the sound of orders cutting through the air. But beneath the routine, a quiet hostility lingered, unspoken but sharp, like a knife waiting to be drawn. For weeks, Sarah had felt it building. Her locker had been tampered with again, her folded uniform thrown carelessly on the floor. Notes appeared on her bunk. "Go back where you came from." Someone even scratched "not one of us" into her gym locker. Each time she reported it to her superior officers. But the response was always the same. Polite nods, empty promises, and silence. Racism wasn't written in the Navy rulebook, but it hid between the lines of every unspoken glance. Still, she refused to break. Every insult only pushed her harder. During drills, she outperformed everyone, pushing herself past exhaustion. Mastering every maneuver, breaking every physical record quietly, without ever needing recognition. But her success only fueled more resentment. A small group of recruits, 5 men who thought of themselves as the real soldiers, started to target her openly. They laughed during her briefings, mimicked her accent behind her back, and whispered slurs when they passed. When she corrected them during training, they muttered that she was trying to act white. One day, during a tactical simulation, one of them accidentally left her radio disconnected, cutting her off from her unit. She still completed the mission, flawlessly. That only deepened their hatred. By now, everyone saw it. Some whispered in sympathy but stayed quiet, afraid to be next. Others joined in the mockery, finding courage in numbers. Sarah, however, never raised her voice. She had seen worse in combat. What hurt more was knowing this fight wasn't against an enemy. It was against her own brothers in uniform. Then came that Friday, the day that would test everything she stood for. It was lunchtime, the mess hall buzzing with laughter, trays clattering and chatter filling the air. Sarah sat alone at the far end, eating quietly, pretending not to notice the stares. The 5 recruits entered together, their voices louder than usual, their confidence sharpened by cruelty. They circled her table slowly, pretending it was a joke. One accidentally spilled his drink across her food. Another mocked her calm face, saying, "Guess they don't teach manners where she's from." Laughter followed, sharp, cold, echoing across the hall, but Sarah didn't move. Her hands rested flat on the table, her eyes fixed ahead. Not anger, a control. Not fear, as precision. The laughter grew uneasy. They expected her to break, to shout, to run, but instead, she looked up, and in one quiet, steady breath, she said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any insult ever could. What happened next? No one in that room would forget. Because in the next 30 seconds, every recruit in that mess hall would learn a lesson that would change the base forever. That racism may humiliate, but it can never defeat true strength. The air in the mess hall thickened, heavy with silence and cruelty. The 5 recruits stood around Sarah like predators circling prey, feeding off each other's arrogance. One leaned closer, sneering, "What's wrong, Lieutenant? Cat got your tongue?" Another laughed and reached for her tray, flipping it to the floor. The hall erupted in nervous laughter, but beneath the noise something shifted. Sarah rose slowly, calm, deliberate, and precise. Her movements were controlled, every inch of her posture radiating authority. Her eyes met theirs, steady and unflinching. In that moment, she didn't have to speak. Her silence demanded respect. When one of them reached out to shove her shoulder, everything changed. In a single motion, Sarah stepped aside, disarmed him, and brought him to the ground using nothing more than technique and control. Another lunged forward. She redirected his weight effortlessly, sending him stumbling backward into a table. The third froze, unsure whether to run or fight. It wasn't rage driving her, and it was discipline. Every movement she made was clean, measured, restrained. She never struck to harm. She acted to protect. Within 30 seconds, the same recruits who had mocked her stood stunned, defeated by the very person they had tried to humiliate. The mess hall fell silent. Trays stopped clattering. Conversations died, and all that remained was the sound of breathing. Hers steady, theirs broken. Sarah looked around the room, scanning the faces that had once turned away. No words, no gloating, and just a calm stare that said everything. She adjusted her uniform, lifted her chin, and walked out. That 30 seconds didn't just silence 5 recruits. It exposed something deeper. Every soldier watching had just witnessed what racism truly fears: quiet power, earned through strength, dignity, and discipline. That day, they didn't just see a woman of color. They saw a leader, and for the first time, they were forced to question what belonging really means. 3 weeks later, the echoes of that day still rippled through the base. What had started as an act of humiliation ended up rewriting the entire narrative of the naval training program. The 5 recruits who cornered Sarah were court-martialed, their arrogance stripped away, their futures in uniform erased. But their downfall wasn't. The real victory was what came. Next, Sarah's report exposed a deeper sickness, a quiet tolerance, for racism disguised as toughness. It revealed how certain recruits of color were pushed harder, isolated, or mocked under the pretense of discipline. Her findings shook the command structure to its core. Within weeks, several instructors were reassigned, new anti-discrimination protocols were enforced, and cultural training became mandatory for every new recruit. The base changed, not overnight, but undeniably, Sarah didn't want credit. She watched from her office window as a new generation of recruits trained on the same grounds where injustice had once thrived. But this time, the shouts she heard weren't laced with mockery. They carried pride, respect, and unity. Williams, the young black recruit who had once been the target, graduated top of his class. When he saluted Sarah after the ceremony, there was no fear in his eyes, only gratitude. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," he said. "You stood up for all of us." That day, Sarah realized something profound. The battle against racism isn't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes it's fought in cafeterias, classrooms, and quiet corners, wherever prejudice hides behind power. The Navy didn't just gain better soldiers that year. It gained better human beings. As Sarah watched the sunset over the base, she smiled softly. Sometimes, it doesn't take a war to change a system, just 30 seconds of courage and one person who refuses to bow to hate. Because racism doesn't die when it's confronted with anger. It dies when it's defeated by honor.